Hello, I'm Josh Hinkle. I'm the Director of Investigations and Innovation at KXAN TV here in Austin, the host of the statewide politics program, State of Texas. As a member of the FOIFT Board of Directors, I'm pleased to introduce your keynote panelists today, two lawmakers very familiar with the Texas Public Information Act. First, farther down, we have Representative Todd Hunter, a Republican representing Corpus Christi. He was first elected to the Texas House in 1988 and served 4 terms. Then in 2008, he returned to the chamber and is now in his 11th term. In the 2021 session, he was chairman of the House Redistricting Committee, also serving on State Affairs, International Relations, and the Economic Development Committee. Senator Nathan Johnson here is a Democrat representing Dallas, first elected to the Texas Senate in 2018. He serves on the Senate Business and Commerce Committee, along with the Jurisprudence and the Water, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs Committees. He is Vice Chair of the Senate Administration Committee and also serves on the Texas Sunset Advisory Commission. Thank you both for being with us. Feel free to respond to each other as we have these answers today, and at the end of the panel, we'll have some time for audience questions as well, so be thinking about those. I'd like to start with an overview of open government at the state capitol. Representative Hunter, just months before the next session in January is where we are right now. What is the mood of the legislature when it comes to the press and public information right now?
Well, we'll have to rethink everything now that Ross Ramsey got the award. It's good to see Ross. Just so you all know, sitting next to Nathan Johnson and seeing Ross Ramsey, I feel like I am Bernie Sanders compared to all that. And it's a great question. It's much different than the Senate. Let me just give you all a process. And I have been in the legislature. I'll be 10th in seniority. And I'll be in the 8 people that have been in the legislature since 1989. So the progress is there's not a lot of senior members or veterans. So the key thing for media, transparency, freedom of information, is you're going to have a lot of new folks coming in. And especially in the House. Out of 150 people, we're going to have a lot of new people. And so what I tell you is you've got a good platform to educate and bring the information forward. But it's going to be an education process because there'll be few veteran legislators in the House and quite a bit of new legislators coming in. So good thing, you got a good slate to start with. And the hard thing is it's an education process because we're going to have so many new folks from across the state. But don't give up. You know, I know at times you give up. The good thing is with a lot of new folks coming in, you can make some points and explain what you really, really do. And I love it. Everybody's for transparency until they have to be transparent. Always remember that. But I think we've got a good slate coming in. I think it's a good opportunity. We'll be talking about some of the laws, especially that the senator and I have co-authored. But the good thing is it's a good field to cultivate and to teach. So it'll be a great opportunity to try to push some of our ideas forward and make transparency a front burner issue, not a back burner.
And in the Senate?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to just pick up right where Representative Hunter left. Am I audible? Right where Representative Hunter left off. Make it something on the front burner. Todd's been doing this since before I got in the legislature. I'm proud to be able to work with him on these issues. And I think if we're looking at what's the atmosphere going into the legislative session, I think the atmosphere is people in the legislature don't pay a whole lot of attention to these issues. I think there's general agreement in both houses. It's bicameral, it's bipartisan, and yet a lot of the measures that we try to introduce don't make it. Why is that? Well, we're still trying to figure that out. But the thing that's on our side, I think, is we just had a rather hysterical couple of years concerning election integrity. And if we are to take seriously the concept of confidence in elections and integrity in elections, why should it stop on election day? Let's have that same level of integrity, that same level of intense interest in the transparency and integrity of the legislative process once they get in there. And I think if we can take that attitude from the last couple of years and kind of channel it into a perhaps more productive way than what it's been, maybe we have an atmosphere where government transparency gets more attention and winds up on the front burner. That's my hope.
One of the biggest public information stories ahead of the session this year has been the fight for transparency following the deadly shooting in Uvalde. Senator Johnson, in early August, a coalition of more than a dozen news organizations filed a lawsuit against the Texas Department of Public Safety that accuses the agency of unlawfully withholding public records related to the massacre, specifically items like police body camera and emergency communications that could shed light on law enforcement response. What did you think when you heard that this was the effort that it was taking to get that information?
Oh, it's gravely disappointing that it takes that kind of effort, but I think it's kind of inspiring that people are making the effort. A large coalition of people, and it was followed up at the end of August with the second lawsuit seeking information along similar lines, similar subjects, similar problems. The public needs to know this, not for the the entertainment factor. It needs to know this so that we can hold agencies accountable, so they understand what's going on. So much discussion takes place in the absence of information. It is hard enough for us to agree or reasonably disagree when we do know what we're talking about. Release of this kind of information provides for a much more serious, sober, civil analysis. Hiding it just breeds conspiracy theories and mistrust. So it's disappointing that it takes this effort, but I'm pleased that someone is making the effort.
Representative Hunter, the governor's office, DPS, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the city of Uvalde have asked the Attorney General for permission to withhold records many in the press believe may hold answers to contradictory accounts of what happened in Uvalde. Texas law does allow agencies seeking to withhold such records to make their case to the Attorney General. In this case, DPS has stated releasing some records could reveal invaluable information about its investigative techniques. What do you think when you hear that argument?
Well, first of all, I don't know the details about the litigation, so I don't know all the legal aspects. But let's just talk blatantly. The Open Records Act is open records. Transparency is transparency. Public confidence is public confidence. If there is a litigation reason, then we have to respect that. But the Open Records and the Open Meeting Act is not supposed to be an obstacle course to get information. That's why it's called freedom of information. And not only on that instance, across the board, from local to state. It is not about transparency when it's taking you months and years to get information. What I'm trying to do is explain to lawmakers, don't lose the philosophy of the act. And it was a terrible tragedy, and it has become a situation. But I see instances across the board, from broadcasters to newspapers. We're not supposed to be making getting information harder. You have more trust in us if we disclose it. And I want you to know, I continually to fight this, and I want to use an example. He and I, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever done, just to show you the obstacle. So he and I filed the birthday bill. What a tragedy that is, isn't it? Getting your birth date because somebody ruled you couldn't. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because I want to make sure if I write a story about you, I got the right person. And by the way, it's so hard to get your birth date. I can get on my phone right now in a committee hearing and find out how old Ross Ramsey is. So it's not like there's any burden. Did you know we can't get it passed by the legislature, right, Donis? Here is freedom of information, information making sure you can report accurately. We haven't been able to pass it. So, as a kind of an overwhelming view, both of us need to go into the legislature to help smooth the roadway on getting access. And that's where we need your help. I mean, if you're running into roadblocks, I got to know. I have Channel 6 here from Corpus Christi. The Corpus Christi Caller-Times got their award. We're already having struggles at home trying to get information, and I'm in the middle of hurricane season, and you just saw what happened in Florida. So bottom line is, I will push for openness. I will push for transparency. And I really do believe you're going to see the needle move that direction. The question is how much.
I'm glad that you brought up the birth date, Bill, because I do want to come back to that a bit more in a bit. But Senator Johnson, related to what we were talking about with Uvalde, agencies have also argued releasing information could interfere with ongoing law enforcement investigations by the federal government and the Texas Rangers, which we're reminded is a division of DPS now investigating its own department. What do you think about that?
There's a reason we have principles and safeguards around active investigations, and as Representative Hunter said, those should be honored. To have them be a blanket stalling tool, and I'm not saying they have been, I'm just saying they might be, is not acceptable. And they seem to be those concepts are tossed around rather cavalierly. And I think that we start having the public lose respect for these entities, organizations, and legislators when we don't treat them a little more seriously. So I'm bothered by what that portends, lacking, though, sufficient information to condemn it. I'm worried about it.
Another open records issue that's reemerged after the Uvalde shooting is something that's been a topic in the last 3 legislative sessions, the dead suspect or custodial deaths loophole. House Speaker Dade Phelan, who's also a Republican, has expressed his concern about the loophole on social media following the shooting, saying it would be, quote, unconscionable for agencies to use the loophole to withhold information that is so badly needed and deserved right now. This is an area, he says, we are in dire need of reform. Representative Hunter, because state law gives police discretion to withhold information in cases that don't result in a conviction, it creates this loophole when a suspect or an offender is killed and will never go to court. Do you anticipate this will be continued to be used in cases like this?
First of all, I support Speaker Dade Phelan on his position. And I've been in the committee hearings where this issue has been brought up. And I do believe the issue is going to be brought up again. And I do believe you're going to get a modification. I think it's important that we, though, educate the members that are coming in. A lot of these laws are old. A lot of them are prehistoric. They don't apply today. And so the world has changed, Texas has changed. Some of these laws need to come up today, which is more openness. So I'll be following Speaker Phelan's position, and I do think it needs to be looked at.
Speaking of the history of this law, the exception, which was originally designed to protect the privacy of accused individuals, is discretionary. Police can choose to disclose most information. In recent sessions, efforts to close this loophole have failed, as we've said, and they've largely been shut down by the work of police unions across the state. What do you think when you hear that, Senator?
I think that legislation is difficult, that things do need to be updated, but it's a Herculean lift. Anytime you want to change something fundamental, there's panic. There may be legitimate interest on the police union side about what's going to happen if we do away with this entirely, but we don't have to do away with it entirely. It's difficult, but that's our job. we're going to have to get down there and figure out, okay, how has society changed? How has law enforcement changed in the past 100 years? What other factors are there? What can we do to prevent this from being abused? The sky's not going to fall. We need to bring the police unions into the room. I don't mind them for being concerned. I do object to obstructionism, and I hope that's not what we encounter.
And back to dates of birth, having access to...
That's easier.
Having access to a birth date in government record, as the representative mentioned, can help the public vet candidates for office, help journalists accurately identify people in crime reports, and employers doing background checks to conduct business. Representative Hunter, date of birth access came into question after a regional appeals court ruled in 2015 they should not be available in public records. You've worked on this issue in recent sessions to allow the public to see unredacted birth dates in public documents, but so far it has not passed, as you mentioned. And you intend to revisit it this session, I'm assuming?
Absolutely. I'm not leaving the legislature till we get date of birth passed. How about that? It is. Let me tell you something.
Should we slow it down?
Yeah, no, we don't need any slow. You're slowing me enough right up here, my friend. No, I'm just kidding. Let me tell you about this date of birth. Right now, Channel 6 from Corpus Christi is here, and they have a story where somebody sent a letter out with my name on it. And no signature, no address. Well, you might have to use something like that, date of birth, to find out who's who on these documents so they can accurately publicize. In criminal investigations, you want to make sure you got the right person, and the date of birth gives you an affirmation, a basis to please make sure your story's right, because you don't need to be challenged. So it's very simple. Date of birth is just a confirmation to make sure accuracy occurs in your stories. And so I'll be pushing it again. I always go in there and I present the bill and I pull out my phone and I start punching in every legislator's name and get their birthdays, even though you can't have it, the internet can have it. And it's just a contradiction. But yes, I'll be pushing it again. I think it makes sense, and I think it's the right information. All media, everybody should have.
And I'll be pushing it with him. I think this is bicameral. I think it's bipartisan. I think we've got overwhelming support, but there are obstacles in the legislative process. My hope is that with the passage of time, certain obstacles maybe cease to be obstacles. I think maybe it derives from a fear that people have about identity theft. Oh, I can't have them know my birthday. If that becomes public information, they're going to apply for a mortgage in my name. That's not the case. Most of them will look up your birthday on Facebook, and who cares? By the way, identity theft has gotten much more sophisticated than lining up a name and a birthday. You can't do it with a name and a birthday. You all know that. And if it comes down to it, they'll find your birthday and steal your identity anyway. That's a whole different issue we could work on with banks and other agencies in government, but knowing your birthday is not an invasion of privacy. It is not a threat to your identity. It is something that could actually, I've had to fill out a mistaken or an affidavit of false identity. I don't know, something where they thought I was somebody else. It could actually be an advantage to you to not be confused with another person. So I think if we can sell it in a positive light and diffuse some of the fear, we might be able to remove some of the last few obstacles and finally pass this.
Open record advocates have noted during the COVID-19 pandemic, some agencies have seemed to make up their own rules about the state's Public Information Act by not responding to requests when their employees were working remotely or operating on a self-defined skeleton crew, even though government was open for business. We'll start with Representative Hunter. Last session, a bill was introduced to create a complaint system at the Attorney General's office to report agencies that fail to respond to public information requests. It passed the House by a vote of 145-0, but it did not get a hearing in the Senate. Would that type of thing address an issue like what open record advocates are talking about with the skeleton crew?
This goes to the problem that you're all facing. Oscar, with the broadcasters. open records, open government, transparency. We have to keep repeating. This isn't, as I said earlier, to be an obstacle course or a litigation procedure. By the time you get the information, it may be old. The whole idea is to educate and inform. So there are law exceptions that I understand. And there are legal situations that, yes, have a protection. And there may be a judicial involvement. But let's just put it this way. Come on. The system's turned into, I don't want to produce it. I'm going to do everything I can to slow it down, get it into litigation, put it in the legal process so you never know anything that's going on. That's not what this was. It's the Texas public that is supposed to get this information. And we've forgotten the word public. Public information, not a protected legal lawyer stream of delay. And I think the entire system would get a little bit of boost of help and hope if we could stress that in these procedures. I am open to any sort of system where we can set up a streamline, getting the complaints done, because, you know, the more you let it get stale, the less impact it has, and the information fresh gets us to get things done. So yes, I would support a framework like that.
I would too. Someone wanted to clap. I'll clap. I would absolutely support it, but I want to make another note of this. I think there may be times when agencies are overwhelmed and they're looking for a way to not have to do the work, or maybe they're annoyed. I want to remove the excuse. I think our agencies have generally been underfunded and understaffed for a long time. I'd like to make sure that the agencies have the resources that they need to live up to the demands that we put on them, including as press that needs information. Let's go ahead and make sure they can respond to your request timely, and then I don't want to hear any excuses for not doing it, and we'll put it into statute. So I'd like to tackle both of those things next session.
Well,
Thank you.
you mentioned the bipartisan efforts that need to happen to get some of these things out. It also takes both chambers. One way that they would have addressed this problem last session was by defining what a business day actually is. It was not something that the Senate took up. How do you make sure that your chamber is also prioritizing open records legislation?
Just take control. As somebody laughed, I think he was a reporter. How do we make sure that the legislature gives it priority? You know, there's 7,000 bills that come through, and it hasn't been a darling of the Senate. Again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of this panel. There is a different environment right now. These bills have been sitting around long enough. Sometimes it takes 6 years to pass anything. We're coming up on 6 years right now. We're due. I think it just takes a little bit of force from a few legislators who think it's important enough to advance. Again, I think some of the obstacles may be dissolving. It just takes a lot of focused attention within the body, and there's going to have to be some public interest in it. If reporters, for example, were to feature it in their publications, I think it might help. We need pressure on this to move it through.
Data journalists know the difficulty agencies can cause when they give you something in a PDF format instead of a format in which it's actually kept. A requester may need the data in an electronic format like Excel for searching, sorting, and organizing. Senator, you've carried legislation to ensure people can get information in the format that the agency actually keeps it. We've heard some lawmakers have said they had concerns about giving information out in a way journalists could manipulate the data and report fake news. How do you plan to address that in the future?
That's the threat from fake news? Okay. I'm not concerned about the fake news. I am concerned about the obfuscation of information by giving somebody a 12,000-page PDF and expecting them to find what's on page 11,000, for example. I can't believe we need a law for this, frankly. It should be searchable. It should be sortable. If any agency is concerned that fake news will be published, they can keep an eye on the publications and publish the original. We can have that discussion in public. It'll be healthy. I think that is a ridiculous excuse to oppose something that ought to be absolutely fundamental. The whole point of having freedom of information is the ability to use the information. It's no good if you give it to me in a sealed plastic bag. Oh, sorry, sealed black cloth bag, so I can't see in it.
Representative?
Well, you forgot the example where you get 200 pages of whiteout. And what you have is a situation where you really got nothing. And then you're put in a situation you have to go back and challenge, get what was whited out. What's happened, and I'm a lawyer, is the Open Records Act has turned into a litigation proceeding, really become a discovery tactic. So if I don't want you to find it, I produce everything in the world, so you have to find it. Or I white it out. The point is, I agree with the concept of legislation. You make the request, produce what the request is. It's not to be an obstacle course, it's not to be a game. And that's what we have to keep harping on. We don't want this to be a litigation procedure. That's not how this act was created.
In recent sessions, there have been legislative efforts to offset damage done by Texas Supreme Court decisions that gutted the public's ability to see how taxpayer dollars are spent. Those decisions allowed governments and businesses they're working with to seal information about their contracts. Senator, do you believe the contracting transparency fix from 2019 is working as intended? Are companies that get government contracts actually sharing the information about the contract with the governmental bodies when a public information request comes in?
Broadly speaking, it's been an improvement. It was a good step. I don't think the spirit of the law that was passed is in full good health right now. I do believe we need to revisit it, tighten up some definitions. More particularly, the act created certain categories of what we call super public information. I'm sure you all know this better than I do, but the fact that we are having trouble still getting out super public information, largely through third parties that have been contracted through governments because we outsource everything, which is another issue, it is disturbing, and I don't want any entity, agency, or otherwise to be able to withhold super public information under the theory that, well, hey, if we release this to you, it might be misleading outside of the context of this other non-super public information, which, by the way, we're litigating to try to withhold, so we're just going to keep all of it until we can tell you we're giving you none of it. I don't buy it. The super public stuff needs to come out on a timely schedule that we can put forward. Again, it's hard to write legislation like this, but that's our job. I would like to move forward with some legislation to ensure that the original intent of, I believe it was Senate Bill 943 by Watson in 2019, make sure that that actually is being followed by public entities and the private entities with whom they contract.
As you've mentioned, it is sometimes difficult to maintain focus on open records legislation. I'll start with Representative Hunter on this one. What other issues do you think will be a focus next session that could distract lawmakers from the topics we've been talking about today?
When you get a lot of money, which we're going to have, that always distracts everybody. And so you're going to have a budget surplus, and I think that will be a big focus. And there could be anything. I mean, I've been around here before Nathan was born. And I can tell you this, the issues will be developed after the election. Once the election process is over, you'll see a movement for your outline. The budget is going to be a big issue. And that's because you're going to have a large surplus. And when you get a large surplus, it's funding and everybody wants money. And that's going to be looked at. Your property tax system is going to be looked at because we've talked about it for 2 sessions. So you're going to have a lot of financial impact. On transparency, I want to not only push the issue of the birth dates, but I also want to protect, be scared about this, a lawyer is talking on your behalf, but I also think we need to protect the media from the electronic publication. I think that the ad process, the publication process is going well, and I don't think that section of notification should be eroded. So I have told our Donis and Oscar and the Freedom of Information that I want to make that a front burner issue, and that will impact all of you. I am an ocean guy. I've represented the coastline. I don't wear a coat. The only reason I wore it because I didn't know if you all were wearing one. And that's why the Caller Times won their award on the sea turtle situation in our coast. You're going to have some coastal issues too. What's this hurricane that just hit Florida? That's a bad deal. You already have windstorm insurance companies going bankrupt, which means everybody in this state gets impacted. So I'm seeing a new issue develop, which has to do with the weather situation and insurance. And even though that may be close to me, it impacts everybody in this room. Of course, higher education, public education will be front burner issues. But overall, your standard financial is going to take a big load. And the difference between us and the Senate, remember, by Constitution, our Speaker is elected the first day of opening session, January 10th. And then we pass our rules. The House doesn't get going for at least 30 days, generally, whereas the Senate can meet quicker. And then also remember the 60-day rule, which I am not a fan of, which says you cannot vote unless the governor says emergency item for the first 60 days. So all of this plays into account. You have a short period. That's what I think will be the impact. There'll be other issues, but I'm just saying these I'm seeing develop up.
Which gives us 80 days to pass or kill 7,000 bills, that 60-day rule. So the budget is going to be the issue, right? It's a lot easier to have a shortfall. You just cut everything. But when you actually have a surplus, and by surplus I mean money that we didn't spend, that some of which maybe we should have, that's a much harder thing for people to deal with politically. And it is going to take up most of it should take up most of our attention. But it does bring up transparency issues. We had issues with some of the spending we did last session. And fortunately, we were able to tack some amendments onto bills, for example, with respect to the ARPA money we were getting from the federal government, to be able to track the efficacy of the programs that we are funding and the ways they're being spent and who's spending them and who's saying okay to what. All of that stuff, as we start unloading this $27 billion, I would very much like to see the legislature tack on reasonable transparency and accountability requirements to the things we do with that money. Last thing I'd like to say has to do with Representative Hunter's coastline and the sea turtles. In my office, especially in the last couple of weeks of session, we view all of our bills as baby sea turtles, and they are getting scooped up by gulls left and right. So again, 7,000 bills come through, 1,000 of them pass, and some of them have little babysitters that walk them all the way down to the ocean before they get eaten up by a barracuda anyway. It's tough to move anything. So if we've got if we've got legislative items that are going to serve you all, and Representative Hunter and I are going to work on them in the Senate, we are going to need to hover over our little sea turtles all the way, because it's tough to get it through. So I hope you'll be there with us. I'm sure you will.
And I want to add something. You know, I'm a grandfather and a father. And, you know, I came in 1989. I had a lot of hair and big glasses, and I looked like Nathan. But what I want you to know is there is an issue, and I really want to encourage you to delve into this. And I want to give you a quick overview of it. And that's suicide and mental health. I'm not talking about the buzzword. I'm not talking about the soundbite. Let me bring this home. I'd never been involved in that. I'm a coastal guy. I spent a lot of time on my region of the state. I think I've represented probably most coastal areas than most people in the legislature. About 3 years ago, and I really want you to look at this issue. And I was impressed. I had 2 to 4 high school students come to me. I mean, come to me. I was impressed because I look older to a high school student, and they would come to me to ask me about suicide. Now, think about this. About 3 to 4 years ago, we didn't talk about suicide. It was, taboo. Don't talk about it. They came to me and told me about 2 of their colleagues who had committed suicide and wanted to talk to me about law changes where they could help. But what impacted me and got me engaged, and my local media knows this is a big issue for me. You do not, because I don't believe mental health is a press conference. I believe it is work. But what motivated me was that they told me one of the students left a note, and it said, if only someone had said hello. I want you to think about that. That means it's a real issue. We're in a different day. I believe shining light into darkness, not covering it up. And we're in a day and age where mental health, mental education, suicide needs to be talked about. So is domestic violence. So does human trafficking. We talk about the border. I'm talking about human trafficking. These are some serious issues that don't just impact Texas, they impact this nation and world. So I want you to keep your radar up, because those are human being issues being brought to us. And I don't want them forgotten, because they are transparent. So just wanted to add that to your list.
Thank you. We have time for a few audience questions. If you have anything, please just shout it out and I'll repeat it. If you could briefly just talk about how we can increase transparency in our family courts.
I would rather accept the invitation for the meeting, look over the information, and have a very candid conversation about that. As far as judges and lawyers, judging judges and lawyers, we have that with many of our professions, with medical boards. The Texas Bar Association is self-governing, but we do need to be able to trust in our courts. We've had issues not just in family courts, but in JP courts with the honesty and record keeping and the availability of records. So it's something that I'm certainly willing to talk with you about and address.
Representative?
And probably your court system is set up differently because the specialty courts a lot of times are different throughout the state. But I'm glad you brought that up, because there is a movement in my region of the state to do a mental health court, not only for veterans and children, but across the board. So it's good timing, because that has been raised to us recently. And to all the media, you don't have to send us an email. Just come by the office. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we're at home. She keeps trying to get a hold of me, and I say, come on down to the coastline. But a lot of us are not in the capital right now. But when we get back, just come by the office. I mean, we both have an open door. And a lot of you are my friends. I've seen it. Ross Ramsey's been my friend for years. He's the only guy that, rather than suing me, wrote a terrible frontline banner that I've never forgotten in my life. But he's my friend. He was wrong. No, I'm just kidding you, Ross. Politicians only want good news. But the bottom line is, you're our friends. We're all the same. I'm not going to speak for everybody, but thank you. And I will also, if you want to meet with you, and you've got my commitment, but I may force her to come down so she can see our turtles, to see what they're missing out.
All right, who else has a question? She's asking about the standardization of publicizing data that is already out there that could maybe make it a little easier on the agencies.
It really expand. I mean, there already is a great deal of data that's public. I think what you're saying is, could we expand that statutorily to maybe prevent the need for so many requests and battles over them? I think it's a very worthy idea of pursuing. But Todd knows a lot more about it than I do.
I think the concept makes sense. That's the danger, it's common sense. So what I'd like to do is take your idea, and we get with Laura Prather, with Haynes and Boone, to make sure we don't trigger something on the other side. But I think the standardization, there should be a block of information that you should just get. The other thing I want you to think about when we do this, after Hurricane Harvey hit my area, we had a lot of vendors, not you. We had a lot of vendors inundating the coastal communities on a lot of requests of information because they were trying to get competing bid information. And so they were actually inundating school districts and public buildings in a hurricane where we didn't even have Wi-Fi or cell phone, and they were having a hard time doing the 10 days. My view, there should be some standard block there where they don't have to go spend 100 hours. So the idea is good. Let us talk with Laura, who counsels, just to make sure we're following something that doesn't open up the other end of the Texas Open Records. But it makes sense. It's common sense. There should be a standard block of information that you should get automatically without it being whited out.
And I would expect that you would have some areas that you would like it to apply to, all of you. So it'd be good to hear from all of you on the subject.
And another question. Talking about penalties for violators of.
I absolutely know. Rachel from Channel 6, who's done a great job. You better mark that down, that a legislator said you did a great job, Rachel. She and I have known each other forever. She used to be at the Caller Times. Let me give you two answers. One, we will be looking at doing some, we'll just say, procedures where it has to be produced so that we don't set a pattern that if you violate it, you get to continue to violate it. That is terrible. That's what a lot of you are going through. Nobody will enforce the law. So everybody just catches on, and then everybody doesn't produce you anything until somebody gets caught. So we are looking at kind of and I'm talking to Laura and Adonis and Oscar about ways that we can put teeth in there so you finally get an order, an answer, or an enforcement. If not, it just flails on, flails on. The other thing is, Rachel and I have been dealing with several local issues. And I want you to know my view. If it's public taxpayer money, the public taxpayer paid for it, the public taxpayer gets the information. It shouldn't be the reverse. And so we need to reemphasize that. And I will be working with the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas to try to get a procedure where you get a response so you don't set a pattern of no responsiveness in the future.
All right. Thank you for all your questions, and let's give a round of applause to these lawmakers for joining us today.